The boarding call had just echoed through Gate 17 at 2:40 p.m., and first-class passengers were already lining up. The air near the jet bridge smelled faintly of perfume and espresso, and the flight crew smiled in that polite, practiced way. A few business types tapped on their phones, barely noticing who stepped into line behind them. Until she did. Ava Miller moved with quiet steps. She held her boarding pass in one hand, her travel bag in the other, and wore a plain gray coat over jeans and a cotton tee. Her dark hair was pulled back, neat and simple, but that wasn't what caught people's eyes. It was the deep, uneven scars that curled across her left cheek and down along her jaw, disappearing under the collar of her shirt. The kind of scars that made strangers pause for a moment too long. The flight attendant at the door hesitated, just slightly, before scanning Ava's pass. A quick glance, a weak smile, and a barely audible thank you. Ava nodded once, stepped onto the plane, and turned into the first-class cabin. The cabin had that muted luxury leather seats, soft lighting, the faint scent of citrus cleaner. A man in a navy blazer looked up from his tablet, froze, then turned quickly back to his screen. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and whispered. Her voice was too low to hear, but the tilt of her head and the sideways glance said enough. Ava didn't respond. She moved toward her seat, 2A, and paused only to slide her bag beneath the footrest. She folded her coat and tucked it into the space beside her. Then she sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the seatbelt. Across the aisle, Veronica Tate watched with cool eyes. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit, heels that clicked with purpose, and a face that rarely showed discomfort. Her assistant had carried her briefcase on board minutes earlier, and now Veronica was sipping sparkling water from a glass stem. She stared at Ava without blinking. It started with a sigh. Veronica leaned slightly to her right and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. Not too loud, not yelling, just enough. I thought this was a premium cabin, she said. I didn't realize they were letting anyone up here now. The woman in pearls gave a faint chuckle. The man beside her muttered something and shook his head. Another passenger 2 rows back raised his eyebrows, looked at Ava, then looked away. Ava stared straight ahead. She didn't adjust her posture. She didn't reach for her phone. Her fingers, resting in her lap, curled in just slightly. Her face didn't change, but her neck tensed, like someone bracing against a cold wind. The whispers picked up again, soft as static. From behind her, someone murmured about dress codes. From the other side of the aisle, a younger man with sunglasses on his collar laughed into his phone and didn't bother to hide the glance he shot her way. Veronica didn't stop. She leaned closer toward the aisle this time. You'd think people would have the decency to stay where they belong. The silence that followed wasn't total. The plane was still boarding. People were still settling in. But around Ava, it was different. It was thicker, like something unseen had filled the space between her and everyone else. She didn't look at Veronica. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze stayed locked on the seat back ahead. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, and shifted slightly in her seat. Her hand moved to rest on her thigh, fingers tight against the fabric of her jeans. The crew walked past without making eye contact. One attendant nodded politely but didn't smile. Another checked the overhead bins and walked away. Veronica reached for her phone, tilted it toward the window, then pulled up the camera as if taking a selfie. She smiled, not a full one, and let the lens capture the background over her shoulder. Ava sat behind her, clearly in frame. Just documenting the state of luxury travel these days, Veronica muttered. No one stopped her. No one said a word. The cabin door closed with a soft click at 2:50 p.m. The aircraft hummed to life. Outside, the runway stretched under a sky smeared with thin clouds. Inside, Ava sat quietly, her back straight, her presence unyielding, as the rest of the world began to shrink away. The plane had barely started taxiing when the first complaint reached the flight attendant. It came from a man in his early 50s wearing a pinstripe shirt and a watch that caught the cabin lights with every hand movement. He leaned toward the aisle, waved slightly, and lowered his voice just enough to make it sound civil. "I don't mean to be difficult," he said, "but is there any chance you could move her to economy? It's a comfort thing." The attendant blinked, then glanced at Ava without turning her head fully. Her lips parted like she might say something, then closed again. She gave the man a tight smile, nodded once, and stepped away without promise. Ava caught the look, though she always did. A few rows back, a younger man with styled hair and AirPods tucked into his collar leaned toward his friend and whispered something behind his hand. His voice was just a little too loud to stay private. They both laughed, fast and low. One of them said, "Bet she's on a voucher. Probably a charity case." Ava didn't move. Her boarding pass was still in her right hand, creased now from her grip. Her thumb pressed against the barcode, the edge of the paper digging into her skin. Her nails were clean, short. Her knuckles had turned white. Across the aisle, Veronica Tate shifted in her seat, took a sip from her glass, and gave a soft, amused sigh. First class used to mean something. She murmured to no one in particular. Now it's a free-for-all. No one corrected her. No one looked offended. One man chuckled. The woman beside him adjusted her silk scarf and gave Ava a passing glance that stopped just short of eye contact. The attendant returned. Hovering beside Ava's row, she hesitated, hands tucked neatly around the corners of her tablet. "Miss," she said. Maybe her voice dropped. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in economy. It's less crowded. That's all." Ava turned her head just enough to meet the attendant's eyes. Her voice came quiet but steady. "I'm fine here." The attendant nodded, almost apologetically, and backed away. Ava refocused on the seat ahead. The air around her felt thick. Her jaw had tightened, and her breathing was slow, measured. She had done this before. Different faces, same tone, same rhythm to the words, like people couldn't help but suggest she didn't belong. She remembered a grocery store 2 years ago. A child had stared openly. The mother whispered, "Sorry," but her face hadn't matched the word. Or the job interview where the manager said they were going in a different direction before she had even spoken. The looks were always the same. Fast glances, then silence, then distance. Another whisper drifted from behind her. "She's bringing the mood down." Someone said, "It's like she's heavy." Someone else replied, "The vibe is just weird, like trauma sat down with us." Ava's lips pressed together. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her shoulders rose slightly, then dropped again. She flexed her fingers. Her legs stayed perfectly still. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom at 3:03 p.m. "Welcome aboard Flight 762 headed non-stop to San Francisco. Expected flight time, 5 hours and 10 minutes. He said it with the same rhythm every pilot used. Ava had always liked that voice. Steady, predictable. She let it settle in the air like a shield. But it didn't last. Veronica stood, stretched her arms, then turned toward the aisle. Her smile was sharp. "You know," she said, "I paid for peace, not a pity party." A man nearby chuckled. A few others didn't laugh, but they didn't say anything either. The flight attendants kept moving. No one made eye contact. Ava sat still. Her heart thudded low in her chest, slow and steady. She unclenched her hand from the boarding pass and set it in her lap. The paper had a small tear along the edge. She traced it with her thumb, then folded it in half. A woman across the aisle reached into her purse for lip balm. Her eyes flicked toward Ava. Their gazes met for less than a second. The woman looked away like she'd touched a burner. Ava tilted her head slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to breathe without feeling crushed. Another voice came, quieter this time. "I feel bad, but it's hard to eat when she's right there." Ava shifted her weight slightly. Her feet stayed planted, but she crossed her ankles. A movement so subtle, it almost didn't exist. Her hand returned to the torn edge of the boarding pass. She didn't speak. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane aligned with the runway. A soft hum built beneath their feet. Someone in the back laughed loudly at something on their screen. The noise rolled forward, then died when it reached her row. She was the silence no one wanted to acknowledge. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the air, Ava stared straight ahead. Her reflection faintly hovered in the darkened screen of the seatback monitor, just the outline of her face, traced in blue light. Her scars were shadows, but she saw them. And she knew. So did everyone else. No one asked her who she was. No one asked what happened. They never did. At 3:20 p.m., just as the plane reached cruising altitude, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice came through, low and clear. "Passenger Ava Miller, please make your way to the front of the cabin. The captain would like a word with you." The words dropped into the cabin like a stone in still water. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few passengers exchanged quick glances, their brows raised. One man near the window leaned closer to the aisle, straining to see. Ava blinked once. Her breath caught without sound. She sat completely still for 2 more seconds, her eyes fixed ahead, as if waiting for a correction or explanation. None came. Veronica Tate's voice cut through the silence. "Well, took them long enough." She said it with a smirk and sipped her drink again. The man beside her chuckled. A woman behind Ava whispered something that ended in the word, "finally." Someone in the back laughed softly. Ava reached down, lifted her bag slowly, and placed it under her arm. She didn't look around. Her fingers brushed over the seam of her jeans, and then she stood. Her seatbelt clicked open with a sharp metallic snap. As she stepped into the aisle, the air shifted. It wasn't loud, but it felt loud. Shoes rustled against carpet. Jackets moved. The kind of noise people made when they wanted to pretend they weren't watching but couldn't help themselves. The man in 2B leaned back slightly, clearing space, but didn't meet her eyes. The woman in 3A adjusted her sunglasses even though the cabin was dim. One child turned completely in his seat to stare, only to be gently pulled back by his mother. Ava walked with measured steps, not slow, but not fast. Her shoulders were square. Her head didn't drop. She passed row after row, the burn of eyes pressing against her back like heat through fabric. She felt everyone. 2 teenagers near row 5 whispered behind their hands. One of them mouthed the words "troublemaker," and the other grinned. Toward the middle of the cabin, a businessman leaned toward his wife. "Guess they're finally removing her," he said, loud enough to carry. His wife didn't respond. She just nodded once, her expression tight, her arms crossed over her designer blouse. Ava kept moving. She reached the divider between first class and the galley. A flight attendant stood there, clipboard clutched in both hands, eyes bouncing between Ava and the door to the cockpit. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she stepped aside. "This way," she said, not quite looking at her. Ava gave a slight nod and stepped forward. Her footsteps were barely audible, but the cabin behind her felt impossibly loud. No one was speaking anymore. Not really. Just the occasional shuffle, the cough, the clearing of throats. The kind of sounds people make when they're waiting for someone else to do something awkward, something uncomfortable. Veronica leaned to the woman across from her. "Do you think she threatened someone? Maybe she snapped at the crew?" Her voice was syrupy sweet. The woman only shook her head, her lips tight. She didn't answer. Someone else said, "Maybe she didn't pay. Maybe it was fraud." Each theory floated up and faded out, passed from mouth to ear like static, but no one really knew, and no one stood up. Ava's fingers curled slightly at her side. She exhaled through her nose. Not a sigh. Not defeat. Just control. She stood now just feet away from the cockpit door. One more step, and she'd be through it. The moment hung there, heavy and still, like a breath no one wanted to release. All eyes were on her back, waiting, watching, wondering what came next. And behind every stare was the same unspoken question. Who is she, and why does the captain want her? The cockpit door opened slowly at 3:25 p.m. Captain James Dwyer stepped out, tall and composed in his Navy uniform. His eyes locked on Ava immediately. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her with a stillness that made the cabin behind her hold its breath. Then, with one deliberate motion, he removed his cap. He held it in his left hand, lowered his head slightly, and straightened his back. "Miss Miller," he said, "it's an honor to finally meet you." The words struck like a sudden gust of wind through a sealed room. Behind Ava, the whispers stopped. Every sound vanished except the low hum of the engines. No one moved. No one breathed. She blinked once. Her hands remained steady at her sides. She didn't speak. The captain turned toward the cabin. His voice rose, calm and strong. 7 years ago, I was pulled from a burning car. I should not be standing here today. But a stranger ran toward the fire when everyone else backed away. He paused. That stranger is standing in front of you right now. Her name is Ava Miller, and she saved my life. A soft gasp escaped from somewhere in the middle rows. A glass clinked against a tray. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Captain Dwyer glanced at her once more, his face open and sincere. "The scars you see are the price she paid to save me." Silence. Not awkward, not confused, just stunned. A woman 2 rows back covered her mouth with her hand. The man in the pinstripe shirt who had requested Ava be moved shrank back into his seat. Veronica's eyes went wide. She looked down quickly, her hands fidgeting with her bracelet. Ava didn't turn around. Her eyes stayed on the captain. She gave a single nod, barely a motion, but it landed heavier than a speech. And still, she said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth was standing beside her, calm, visible, unshakable. For the first time since she boarded, no one looked away from her scars. They saw her. Ava hadn't moved. She stood just outside the cockpit, calm and still, while the cabin behind her shifted in awkward silence. The weight of what the captain had said hadn't faded. If anything, it was getting heavier. Veronica was the first to speak. She cleared her throat softly, as if preparing for a public statement. Then she stood, adjusting her crimson blazer with practiced grace. "I didn't realize," she said, her voice too bright. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Ava turned her head, just slightly. Her eyes met Veronica's without anger. Her voice was soft, almost quiet, but every word landed clean and sharp. "You didn't have to know. You just had to be kind." Veronica froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She sat back down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. A man near row 3 lowered his phone, which had been halfway to recording. He looked away, cheeks flushed. The woman in pearls pulled her scarf tighter and stared at the floor. The cabin had turned quiet again, but it was no longer a silence of judgment. It was one of shame. A few moments passed before a little girl stepped into the aisle. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her braids bounced with each step, and she held a folded piece of paper gripped tightly in both hands. She walked up to Ava and looked up with wide eyes. "I made this for you," she said. Ava knelt carefully, accepting the drawing. It was made with crayons, lines uneven and colorful. A woman stood tall in the middle of the page, her face marked with soft red lines. Around her were stars, big ones. "You're a superhero," the girl said. Ava blinked once. Her fingers gently smoothed the paper. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first time her voice had cracked. The girl smiled, then skipped back to her seat. Her mother wiped her eye with a napkin, not bothering to hide it. The energy in the cabin shifted again. This time, it was reverent. The same passengers who had once recoiled now watched in stillness, not because they had to, because they didn't know how else to be. Ava turned back toward her seat. She moved slowly, the drawing still in her hand. As she passed row by row, people looked up. Some nodded. Some looked down. No one laughed. No one whispered. She sat back down in 2A, her bag untouched, her coat still folded, the drawing she placed gently in the seat pocket. Her hands rested in her lap. No applause, no big speech, just quiet. But in that quiet, everything had changed. Ava settled back into her seat at 3:40 p.m. Her body moved slower now, not from exhaustion, but from something else. The weight pressing on her since boarding had eased, just slightly. The cabin around her was quiet. Not frozen. Not tense. Just quiet. A few passengers avoided her eyes, not out of disgust, but out of guilt they didn't know how to name. The man across the aisle shifted in his seat, then sat perfectly still. A flight attendant approached without a word. She placed a glass of water on Ava's tray table. Her hands trembled just enough to notice. She didn't apologize. She didn't smile. She simply stepped back and gave Ava space. Outside the window, clouds passed in soft, slow shapes. The sunlight filtered through them, warm and unbothered. Ava watched them for a long moment. Her fingers rested gently on the edge of the tray. The girl's crayon drawing was still tucked inside the seat pocket. She exhaled, not deeply, just enough. I don't need to be beautiful, I just need to be seen. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had been. By 6:15 p.m., while the flight was still in the air, someone had uploaded a short clip. It showed the captain removing his hat, his voice calm as he told the cabin that Ava Miller had saved his life. By the time the plane touched down, the video had been reposted across 3 platforms, each with more views than the last. By midnight, the hashtag #NarAvaTheHero was trending. People shared their own stories of scars, of being judged, of staying silent when they should have spoken. The internet didn't just react. It moved. Brands that once worked with Veronica quietly severed ties. A major firm released a vague statement about values and accountability. Users pulled screenshots. Names were shared. Faces were recognized. The man who called her a charity case was identified. He lost his speaking slot at a conference the next week. The woman in the scarf deleted her social profiles within hours, and no one even remembered what the girl in 5C had said, only that she never apologized. Ava didn't give interviews. She didn't record a video. She didn't explain. She posted a single sentence. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't loud. But it landed. The world didn't just see her scars. It saw her courage. And this time, it remembered. Maybe you felt it too. That moment when someone looks at you and decides who you are before you've said a single word. Maybe it was a comment, a glance, a space that suddenly didn't feel safe. And maybe you held it in because fighting back just felt exhausting. But here's what I want you to know. Your scars, whether visible or hidden, tell a story of strength. They are proof you've lived through something hard and kept going. You don't need to explain them to anyone to make them real. If Ava's story reminded you of your own, you're not alone. Share your story, even just a part of it. Not for attention, not for validation, but because someone out there might need to hear it the way you needed to hear this one. We walk through a world that often misses the quiet ones. But sometimes, that quiet carries the loudest kind of truth. Thanks for being here. Let's keep walking together.